The dog had been at the gate every morning for 3 years. Not waiting. Waiting implies uncertainty. Rex did not have uncertainty. He had the specific, unwavering attention of an animal that has made a decision and is living inside it completely. Every morning he walked from the barn where he slept to the gate at the end of the Reed property on Route 14 outside Cody, Wyoming. And he sat and he watched the road. He watched it the way trained dogs watch things, systematically, thoroughly, reading every vehicle that passed for the specific combination of sound and movement and scent that he was looking for. He had not found it in 3 years. He sat every morning until the light changed, and then he walked back to the barn. He had done this through 3 Wyoming winters, which are the kind of winters that break things. He had not broken. Emma Reed was 16 years old and had been bringing Rex his food every morning and every evening for 3 years, and she had never once tried to get him to come inside permanently, because she understood, in the specific way that some children understand things that adults rationalize away, that the dog was not staying at the gate out of stubbornness or confusion. He was staying because he knew something. And Emma had decided, in the specific quiet of a 16-year-old girl who has made a private decision and is keeping it, that she was going to trust what he knew. She was right to trust it. She just didn't know yet that the morning she had been waiting for was this one. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story reaches you, please subscribe and follow it until the very end. What happened at the gate on Route 14 outside Cody, Wyoming on a March morning is something that every person who has ever waited for someone they refuse to stop believing in deserves to hear. Stay with us. Nathan Reed had been Senior Chief Petty Officer Nathan Reed, SEAL Team 3, for 14 years. He was 39 years old, looked older now, in the specific way that 3 years of things he was not going to describe in detail had arranged his face into something harder and quieter and more deliberate than it had been before. He was 6 feet, lean in a way that was new, the kind of lean that comes from conditions rather than choice, with dark hair that had grown past what he would have chosen, and a jaw that carried 3 days of growth, because he had been in a hospital in Germany for 5 weeks, and a rehabilitation center in Virginia for 7 more, and had not, in that time, cared very much about the razor. His eyes were gray-blue and still, the specific stillness of a man who has been somewhere and has come back and is still in the process of determining what he has come back to, and is doing that determining carefully, the way he did everything. He had been in captivity for 11 months before the extraction. He had been in medical care for 25 months after it. The extraction itself was the subject of a classified briefing that he had given twice and would give again, and the details of the 11 months before it were the subject of conversations he was having with a psychologist in Virginia, and would continue having for as long as it took. And none of that was this story. This story was Wyoming in March, and a gate on Route 14, and a dog that had not moved from his post in 3 years. He had not been declared dead. That was important. The Navy had listed him as missing in action, a designation that carries its own specific grief. The grief of not knowing, which in some ways is heavier than the grief of knowing, because it cannot be put down. His wife, Carolyn, had waited 2 years. He understood why she had stopped waiting. 2 years is a long time, and a missing in action designation is not a grave marker. And a woman with a daughter and a farm cannot stop her life indefinitely for a word in a file. He did not blame her. He was working on not blaming her. He was also working on a great many other things. And the psychologist in Virginia had told him that working on a great many things at once was the only option available to him, and that he was doing it correctly, which was the kind of thing psychologists said that was both true and not quite sufficient. He had heard about Carolyn's remarriage from his commanding officer. in Germany, with the specific gentleness that senior officers develop for delivering news that cannot be made gentle. He had received it with the controlled stillness that was now simply the way he received things. He had asked 2 questions. The first was about Emma. The second was about the dog. Emma had not stopped believing he would come back. That was what his CO told him, reading from the notes a family liaison officer had provided. Emma had been 13 when he disappeared and was 16 now and had not stopped believing, and had been feeding the dog at the gate every day for 3 years. He had cried once, in Germany. It was the first time since the extraction, and it was because of those 2 facts, which together said something about his daughter that he did not have adequate language for, and did not need to. Rex had been his since 2018, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a chest like a barrel and a coat the color of dark autumn leaves, amber and black and thick, with a scar along his left jaw from a fragmentation wound outside Fallujah that had required 12 stitches and had healed into a ridge of slightly different colored fur that Rex had worn with complete indifference ever since. He weighed 87 pounds and had served 3 deployments and had been Nathan's working partner for 4 years before Nathan's last deployment, from which Nathan had not come home on schedule. Rex had been left with the family, a temporary arrangement that had become permanent by force of circumstance. Rex had made his own arrangements. He had walked to the gate and sat down and decided to wait, and he had not been persuaded otherwise by 3 winters or the absence of the thing he was waiting for or anyone's reasonable assessment of probability. The community had fed him. That was the thing Nathan learned later. The specific thing that made his throat close when he heard it. The neighbors on Route 14, the people from town, the families whose children had gone to school with Emma, they had brought food. Not to the barn where Rex slept. To the gate where Rex waited, because word had gotten around that the Reed dog was sitting at the gate waiting for Senior Chief Reed. And Cody, Wyoming is the kind of town where that kind of story is received as a charge rather than a curiosity. People brought kibble and water, and in the worst of the winter months, warm broth, and they set it down at the gate and Rex ate it, and went back to watching the road, and nobody tried to move him. Because everyone understood by the end of the first winter that moving him was not going to be possible, and that trying to do so said more about the person trying than about the dog. Emma had not told him any of this in the calls. The first call from Germany had lasted 12 minutes, and Emma had cried for the first 2 and been completely composed for the remaining 10 in the specific way of a girl who had prepared for this moment for a long time and was not going to waste it. She had told him she was fine. She had told him Rex was at the gate. She had told him she was going to see him soon. She had said these things in the order that revealed what mattered most to her, and Nathan had received them in that order and filed them accordingly. She had not told him about Dale Pruitt. He learned about Dale Pruitt when he called Ida May. Not Ida May. A different woman, his neighbor, Bev Carlisle, who was 68 years old and had known Nathan since he was 12, and who told him things directly because she had always told him things directly and was not going to change now. Dale Pruitt owned Pruitt Agricultural Holdings, which was the name for the operation by which Dale Pruitt had acquired 11 properties in Park County over the preceding 6 years at prices that reflected the financial circumstances of the sellers more than the actual value of the land. He had been approaching Carolyn about the Reed property since the end of Nathan's first year missing, beginning with expressions of sympathy and concern and offers to help with the operational demands of a working farm managed by a woman alone with a teenager, which was a real need presented in a framework designed to produce a particular outcome. By the second year, he had moved to formal offers. By the third year, his attorney had sent a letter describing the family's property tax situation. The farm was 8 months in arrears, which Bev told Nathan in the same direct tone she used for everything, and suggesting that a sale was the prudent option for a family in their circumstances. Carolyn had not sold. Bev was not entirely sure why, whether it was Emma, who had told her mother in terms that did not invite discussion that the farm was not going to be sold while Rex was at the gate, or whether it was something in Carolyn herself that had not fully made the peace with the loss that the remarriage might have suggested. The farm had not been sold. The taxes were in arrears, and Dale Pruitt's attorney had filed a motion in the county court the previous month, seeking to initiate a tax lien process that could, if it ran its full course, result in the forced sale of the property at a price that would be considerably below its actual value. Nathan received this information on the phone with Bev on a Wednesday morning in Virginia, and he sat with it for a long time after the call ended, in the specific way of a man who has been processing difficult information for 3 years and has become very good at it, and who is now processing something that has a different quality than anything he has processed in all that time. Not grief, not injury, not the particular excavation of the long months he was away. Something that required a different response. He called his attorney that afternoon. His attorney, a veteran's legal advocate in Cheyenne who had been managing Nathan's affairs during his MIA designation and who had considerably more experience with the specific legal situation of a service member returning from MIA status than anyone in Pruitt's legal team had anticipated needing to deal with, told him 3 things. First, that Nathan's MIA status had never been converted to Kia, which meant his legal standing in relation to the property had never formally lapsed. Second, that the tax lien motion had been filed prematurely and incorrectly, and contained a procedural error that made it vulnerable to challenge. Third, that Dale Pruitt's attorney was probably not aware that the man whose name was on the deed had just gotten off a plane from Virginia. Nathan said, "How fast can you file the challenge?" His attorney said, "It'll be done before Pruitt's office opens tomorrow." Nathan said, "I'm driving to Wyoming on Thursday." He drove 16 hours, straight through, stopping twice for gas and once for coffee and not for anything else, because the road to Wyoming from Virginia is long enough to require patience. And the patience was the thing he had in the greatest supply after 3 years of practicing it in conditions that made 16 hours in a truck feel like an afternoon. He arrived on Route 14 outside Cody at 6:47 in the morning, when the March sky was doing the specific thing March skies do in Wyoming, turning from the deep blue-black of high-altitude night to a pale gold at the eastern horizon that is not quite sunrise, but is unmistakably the announcement of it. He pulled over 200 yards from the gate. He turned off the engine. He sat. Rex was at the gate. He was sitting in his position, the specific, deliberate, watchful sit that he had maintained for 3 years, facing the road, ears forward, reading the traffic on Route 14 with the systematic attention of an animal running a patterned search that has not returned the result it is looking for, and has decided to keep running it until it does. Nathan sat in the truck for a long moment. He was aware that he was going to need a minute before he got out, and he took it, because he had been a man who took the minute he needed since before the 14 years, and the deployment and all the rest of it, and he was going to remain that man regardless of what came next. He got out of the truck. Rex did not turn immediately. He was watching a vehicle passing from the east, and he finished watching it, completed the read, confirmed it was not what he was looking for, and then turned to assess the new variable that had appeared on the western shoulder. He turned. He went completely still. Nathan stood on the shoulder of Route 14, with his hands at his sides in the pale gold of the Wyoming March morning, and he looked at his dog, and his dog looked at him. And the road between them was perhaps 150 yards of frozen gravel, and there was no sound except the wind off the mountains and a single vehicle passing somewhere behind Nathan, and not slowing. Rex stood up from his sit. He stood for a moment, one moment, the specific beat of an animal confirming something it has been trained not to confirm until confirmation is certain. Because certainty is the thing that matters and not speed. Then he came. Not running. He was 8 years old, and 3 years at a gate in Wyoming winter had put their mark on him, and he was not the dog that would run anymore. But he came with everything he had, steady and fast and completely certain, covering the 150 yards of frozen gravel with the ground-eating pace of an animal that has made its decision and is not reconsidering it. And Nathan dropped to one knee on the shoulder of Route 14, and Rex hit him at the chest, and Nathan put both arms around the dog and held on. Rex made a sound. Nathan had heard that sound once before. In Fallujah, the night Rex had found a missing team member in a collapsed building, and the team member had been alive, and Rex had pressed against him and made the sound that meant, "I found you. I found you. You are not lost anymore." He made it now. Nathan held the dog, and the dog held him back, and the Wyoming morning continued to arrive around them, the gold at the eastern horizon spreading and warming, and the mountains to the west holding the last of the night on their faces, and the frozen gravel of Route 14 was cold through the knee of his jeans, and he did not notice it at all. He heard the gate and looked up. Emma had come out of the house. She was 16 years old and had her mother's coloring and his eyes, the gray-blue, steady ones, and she was wearing her barn coat and her boots, and she had come out of the house at 6:47 in the morning because she had been watching from the window, and she had seen the truck stop 200 yards from the gate, and she had understood before anything else had happened what the truck stopping meant. She stood at the gate with her hand on the latch, and she looked at her father on one knee in the gravel with his arms around Rex. And she did not say anything for a long moment. Then she opened the gate, and she walked through it, and Nathan stood up, and she walked into his arms, and he held his daughter on the shoulder of Route 14, while Rex pressed against both of them with his full 87 pounds of dark amber certainty. And the three of them stood there while the Wyoming morning finished its arrival. The tax lien motion was withdrawn 11 days after Nathan's attorney filed the challenge. Pruitt's legal team had seen the procedural error at the same time Nathan's attorney had, which meant they had known before filing that the motion was vulnerable, which the judge noted in her order dismissing it as a basis for her finding that the filing had been made in bad faith. The bad faith finding was forwarded to the state bar for review of Pruitt's attorney's conduct. The attorney received a formal admonishment. Dale Pruitt, whose 11 Park County acquisitions were now the subject of an informal inquiry by the county assessor's office, triggered by a complaint filed by Nathan's attorney on the same day as the tax lien challenge, spent the following 6 months cooperating with that inquiry through his remaining legal representation, which was more expensive than the Park County properties had been profitable. Pruitt sold 7 of the 11 properties in the following year. He did not attempt to acquire any further properties in Park County. The property taxes on the Reed farm were brought current through a combination of Nathan's back pay. 16 months of senior chief's pay had accumulated during the MIA period, held in trust by the Navy, and released to him upon his return, and a veteran's hardship fund that his attorney had identified and applied to on Nathan's behalf before Nathan had known it existed. The farm was solvent by June. By the following March, 1 year after the morning on Route 14, the Reed property had the specific quality of a place that is being actively lived in rather than endured. The south fence had been rebuilt. The barn roof had 2 new sections. The kitchen had been repainted in the color Emma had chosen, which was a particular shade of yellow that she said looked like the March morning when Rex came off the gate, and which Nathan had agreed to without hesitation, because it did. Rex had given up the gate. Not immediately. It took him 3 weeks to stop going to it in the mornings, and for those 3 weeks Nathan went with him, walking the Route 14 road in the early light, and they stood at the gate together for a while each morning before walking back, until one morning Rex simply turned away from the gate without stopping and walked back to the house and lay down in the sun on the south-facing porch and closed his eyes. Nathan sat down next to him. After a while, Emma came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat on the other side of the dog, and they drank their coffee in the Wyoming morning sun, the 3 of them, with Rex warm and solid between them and the mountains to the west still carrying their snow, and the sky above them, the specific blue that only exists at elevation and only in March when the winter has finally decided to let go. Rex's tail moved against the porch boards. Slow, certain, the sound of 3 winters finally over. Sometimes miracles take 3 years. Sometimes they require 3 Wyoming winters and a community that brings food to a gate and a 16-year-old girl who decides to trust what a dog knows, and a man in a hospital in Germany who asks 2 questions when he gets the worst news of his life, and the first one is about his daughter, and the second one is about the dog. Sometimes God's timing and our timing are not the same, and the distance between them is not a sign that the miracle isn't coming. It is simply the distance. Rex did not know about classified operations or MIA designations or the machinery of the military and the legal system and the long, complicated work of coming home. He knew one thing: his person would come back. He sat at that gate because the alternative, accepting that the road would never bring what he was waiting for, was not something he knew how to do. And because he would not accept it, because he sat in the snow every morning for 3 years and watched every vehicle on Route 14 with the full attention of an animal that has not given up, he was sitting there when the right truck finally pulled over. God does not forget the ones who wait. He does not forget the dogs at the gates and the daughters in the windows and the men in the hospitals asking about the people they left behind. Faithfulness is never wasted. It is always recorded. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, in the grace of mornings like the one on Route 14, it is answered. If this story reached you today, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the ones we love are worth waiting for, and that waiting is itself a form of love. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and if you have ever waited for someone who came back. We want to hear that. Your story might be the hope someone else needs tonight. If you believe in faithfulness, in homecoming, in the grace of every morning that turns out to be the one you were waiting for, subscribe to this channel and don't miss the next story. May God bless you, protect your family, and grant patience to everyone who is still waiting. The road is not empty. Keep watching.